My name is Carol, a 34-year-old marketing director living in Chicago. The moment I walked into that upscale restaurant for our mandatory family brunch, I felt the familiar knot in my stomach. My mother looked me up and down with her trademark disapproval before smirking and saying those words that would change everything. "You are lucky we even include you. Pity goes a long way." I simply sipped my coffee and smiled, knowing what they did not know about who actually controlled the family purse strings. Before I continue my story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that subscribe button, and stay tuned to find out how I finally stood up to decades of family emotional abuse. Growing up as the middle child in the Sullivan family meant living in a constant state of invisibility. Our home in the affluent North Shore suburb of Lake Forest was picture-perfect from the outside, 4,000 square feet of architectural brilliance with manicured gardens and a 3-car garage. But inside those walls I learned early that achievements were to be expected, not celebrated, and any shortcomings would be magnified for everyone to see. My father, Thomas Sullivan, now 68, built his real estate development company from scratch. Sullivan Properties dominates the Chicago commercial market, with buildings bearing our family names scattered throughout the downtown area. To the business world, he was brilliant, driven, and respected. To his family, he was a phantom who appeared for dinner, occasionally asked about grades and achievements, and disappeared back into his home office before dessert was served. His standard response to any of my school accomplishments was a distracted nod, and "What about that math grade? We need to see improvement there." My mother, Diane, 65, perfected the art of social climbing. A former beauty queen who married well, she dedicated her life to maintaining appearances and ensuring the Sullivan name commanded respect in all the right circles. Her perfectionism extended to her children, though not equally. For me, her criticism was relentless. My hair was never quite right, my posture needed work, my voice was too loud, my ambitions too modest. Nothing I did met the Sullivan standard, especially when compared to my siblings. James, my older brother by 4 years, was the golden child from birth. Following directly in our father's footsteps, he joined Sullivan Properties after getting his MBA from Northwestern. At 38, he now serves as the company's finance executive, though his actual business acumen is questionable at best. But in my mother's eyes, James could do no wrong. His mediocre grades were celebrated as evidence of his social priorities. His failed relationships were always the woman's fault. His financial missteps were learning experiences. Then there was Amanda, my younger sister by 5 years. At 29, she has built her entire identity around being pretty charming and agreeable to our parents. She studied art history because mother thought it was sophisticated, dated only men from approved families, and recently got engaged to the son of one of father's business partners. Amanda learned early what I discovered too late. It was easier to become what our parents wanted than to fight for your own identity. The pattern was established early for me. When I won the regional spelling bee in 4th grade, my parents skipped the ceremony for one of James' football games. When I was accepted to University of Chicago with a partial scholarship, the accomplishment was overshadowed by concerns that I had not chosen Northwestern like James. When I landed my first marketing job at a prestigious agency, mother wondered why I had not considered something more feminine like interior design. The one person who saw me for who I was, who celebrated my achievements and comforted my disappointments, was my grandmother Eleanor, my father's mother. Unlike her son, she had warmth and genuine interest in my life. She would call me weekly throughout college, sent care packages with handwritten notes, and always told me I was stronger than I knew. She owned a beautiful lakeside cabin in Michigan that became my sanctuary during summers. While the rest of the family saw it as a status symbol and party venue, Grandma Eleanor and I appreciated its peace and natural beauty. 5 years ago, Grandma Eleanor passed away after a brief illness. What my family did not know was that before her death, she had quietly transferred ownership of the cabin to me. She knew I was the only one who truly loved it for what it was, not what it represented. The cabin was worth nearly $2 million given its prime lakefront location and recent renovations. I kept this information to myself, allowing my family to continue using the property as they always had. They never questioned who was paying the taxes or maintenance costs, assuming it was all handled by the family trust. They would plan vacations there without consulting me, leave messes for the cleaning service I hired, and never once expressed gratitude. Despite the constant emotional neglect at home, I built a successful career in marketing. Starting at entry level, I worked my way up through multiple agencies before launching my own boutique firm specializing in digital strategy for sustainable businesses. My company now employs 15 people and generates annual revenue that would impress even my father if he bothered to ask about it. 2 months ago, I secured a major contract with a national eco-friendly retail chain, a deal worth 7 figures over 3 years. When I mentioned it briefly at a family dinner, my mother responded with, "Oh, how nice. I suppose you got lucky with timing since everyone is into that green thing these days." James immediately redirected the conversation to his recent acquisition of an office building downtown. That was the pattern. Invitations to family events felt obligatory rather than genuine. I was included because it would look odd to outsiders if I were absent, not because anyone particularly wanted me there. For years, I accepted this dynamic, hoping that someday I would earn their approval and respect. It took 3 years of weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Rachel Winters to help me see the toxic family dynamics clearly. She helped me understand that no achievement would ever be enough, no success would ever make them see me as an equal. The problem wasn't me, it was their inability to value anyone who didn't reflect exactly what they wanted to see. What my family also did not know was that over the past few years, I had gradually taken on management of significant portions of the family trust. My father, dismissive of financial paperwork, had been all too happy to hand over the administrative duties to me. "Carol likes that detail stuff," he would say with a wave of his hand. "Let her handle it." And handle it I did. I discovered inefficiencies, corrected poor investment strategies, and quietly consolidated my position as an essential but unacknowledged financial manager of the Sullivan family wealth. I had access to family credit accounts, investment portfolios, and property management systems, not because they trusted me, but because they underestimated me so completely that they never considered I might use that power. For years, I continued to show up at family events, absorb the subtle and not-so-subtle put-downs, and return to my lakefront condo to recover from the emotional battering. I kept hoping for change, for recognition, for the simple dignity of being valued as a member of the family rather than tolerated out of obligation. But as my grandmother always told me, hope is not a strategy. And after 34 years of hoping, I was finally ready for a strategy of my own. The brunch that changed everything was held at Elliston, one of Chicago's most exclusive restaurants overlooking Millennium Park. With its soaring glass windows, white marble tables, and reputation for turning away anyone without a reservation made at least 3 weeks in advance, it was exactly the type of place my mother loved to be seen. She had insisted on this specific Sunday, texting the family group chat, "Important family discussion, brunch at Elliston, 11 a.m. sharp. Do not be late." The command was typical of her communication style, no pleasantries, no room for negotiation. I arrived at exactly 11, having timed my drive carefully to avoid both tardiness unforgivable and excessive earliness appearing too eager. Still, as the hostess led me to our table by the window, I could see the rest of my family was already seated, 4 pairs of eyes tracking my approach with various degrees of judgment. "Good of you to join us, Carol," my mother said, though I was precisely on time. Her cream-colored Street John knit suit probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, her pearls gleaming against her surgically tightened neck. My father merely nodded, already engrossed in the mimosa before him. James, in his standard business casual uniform of designer jeans and a button-down shirt, was busy texting someone, probably his latest girlfriend. Amanda sat beside my mother, their matching blonde highlights, creating the illusion of genetic destiny rather than the work of the same expensive colorist. "I see you wore jeans," my mother observed, as I took the only remaining seat. She made it sound like I had arrived wearing a garbage bag. Though they were premium denim that cost $300, part of my carefully cultivated professional casual look, completed with a tailored blazer and silk blouse. "They are appropriate for Sunday brunch," I replied, evenly unfolding my napkin onto my lap. Well, I suppose not everyone needs to make an effort, Amanda chimed in, smoothing her floral sundress with one hand while conspicuously adjusting her 4-carat engagement ring with the other. The server arrived to take my drink order, providing momentary relief from the immediate criticism. Black coffee, please, and water is fine. No champagne. My brother finally looked up from his phone. It's practically mandatory here. Their mimosa cart is famous. I have a client meeting later, I said, though it was a lie. I simply wanted to keep my head clear. The small talk phase of family gatherings always followed the same script. My mother commented on my appearance critically. My father asked about nothing of substance, and my siblings took turns highlighting their recent triumphs while looking for opportunities to diminish mine. James, your father tells me the Henderson deal finally closed, my mother said, beaming at her firstborn. Apparently you saved the whole project. My brother grinned, launching into a detailed account of his supposed business genius that had rescued a failing negotiation. In reality, I knew from my access to the company financials that James had nearly tanked the deal by overplaying his hand, and my father had to step in personally to salvage the relationship. When James finally paused for breath, Amanda immediately jumped in. Well, not to steal your thunder, but Gregory and I finalized our wedding venue yesterday. The Palmer House Hilton. Mother, you were right. Nothing else compared. The Palmer House. My mother clasped her hands in delight. Oh, it's perfect. Carol, did you hear that your sister will be having the wedding of the year? I offered a genuine smile to Amanda. Congratulations. The Palmer House is beautiful. I hope you will be very happy. My sincerity was met with suspicious glances, as though they were waiting for the backhanded compliment that would never come. When none materialized, my mother quickly moved on. Now, the real reason I wanted us all together today, my father announced, setting down his now empty mimosa glass with authority. Sullivan Properties is expanding. We're acquiring the Lakefront Tower complex and developing the surrounding 3 blocks into a mixed-use property. It's going to be the biggest project in company history. That's wonderful, I said, genuinely impressed by the ambition of the project. My father continued as if I hadn't spoken. James will be taking the lead on this project, serving as development director while I focus on investor relations. I cannot wait to get started, James said, practically bouncing in his seat like an eager child. It's going to transform that whole section of the city. Well, need to celebrate properly, my mother added. I was thinking we should all spend the 4th of July week at the cabin. A proper family vacation before everyone gets too busy with the project and wedding planning. The cabin. My cabin, legally speaking, though, they had no idea. I had been allowing them to use it as they wished, even though they never bothered to check if I had my own plans before scheduling these family gatherings. That sounds nice, I said carefully, though I think the deck needs some repairs before we plan any major gatherings. The last storm did some damage to the lakeside portion. The eye rolls were immediate and synchronized, a Sullivan family specialty. Oh, Carol always worried about silly details, my mother said with a dismissive wave. The cabin is fine. It's been standing for 50 years, it can handle a little weather. I was about to point out that proper maintenance was why the cabin had lasted 50 years, but my father cut in. Well, hire someone if it's really necessary, he said. Just forward the quote to James for approval. For approval. As if my brother had any authority over my property. As if I needed permission to maintain something I owned outright. I must have shown some reaction because my mother narrowed her eyes at me. What is it now, Carol? You always get that look when you're overthinking something simple. I took a slow breath. It's nothing. I just think we should address the repairs sooner rather than later. My mother exchanged a look with my father, the kind of glance that contained an entire conversation about my supposed difficulty. Then she turned back to me with that familiar expression, a mixture of pity and irritation that I had seen countless times throughout my life. You know, Carol, she said, her voice taking on that saccharine quality that always preceded her most cutting remarks. You are lucky we even include you in these family plans. Pity goes a long way. The table went silent. Even James and Amanda seemed shocked by the blatant cruelty of the statement. My father suddenly became very interested in the menu, though we had already ordered. In previous years, this would have been the moment where I either fought back tears or excused myself to the restroom to cry privately. It would have been another wound to add to the collection, another reason to call Dr. Winters for an emergency session. But something had shifted inside me. Perhaps it was the accumulated weight of a lifetime of similar comments. Perhaps it was the contrast between my professional success and continued emotional subjugation within my family. Whatever the reason, instead of pain, I felt a strange, calm clarity. I lifted my coffee cup, took a deliberate sip, and smiled. The reaction around the table was immediate. My mother blinked rapidly, clearly thrown by my failure to respond as expected. My father glanced up from his menu, eyebrows raised. James and Amanda exchanged confused looks. "Is something funny?" my mother finally asked, her voice sharp with uncertainty. "Not at all," I replied calmly. "The coffee here is excellent. You made a good choice with this restaurant." The server arrived with our food, creating a welcome diversion. We ate with minimal conversation, the usual family dynamic disrupted by my unexpected response. When the check came, I placed my credit card alongside my father's before anyone could suggest I wasn't paying my share. "I need to get going," I said, standing once the payment was processed. "Thank you for brunch. It was enlightening." "Enlightening," my mother repeated as if I had spoken in a foreign language. "What does that mean?" "Just that I appreciated our time together," I said, gathering my purse. "Enjoy the rest of your Sunday." I walked out of the restaurant with my head high, feeling their confused stares following me to the door. For the first time in my life, I had refused to accept the role they had assigned me, and it felt like breathing fresh air after a lifetime underwater. The drive back to my condo was unusually peaceful. Normally, after family gatherings, my mind would race with replays of every interaction, analyzing what I could have said differently or how I might have better defended myself. But today, there was only clarity and a strange sense of liberation. As I navigated the Sunday traffic along Lakeshore Drive, memories of similar comments floated through my mind. "When I graduated from college, at least you finished, though your brother did it with honors. When I bought my first apartment, it's quite small, but I suppose it's suitable for just you. When I started my company, a cute little business, not everyone is meant for corporate success like James." I pulled into the parking garage beneath my building, a modern high-rise with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. The doorman greeted me by name as I entered the lobby with its marble floors and contemporary art. My home was a far cry from the small apartment my mother had once dismissed. Inside my 12th-floor condo, I kicked off my shoes and went straight to my home office. The wall of windows provided a spectacular view of the lake, the water glittering under the early afternoon sunday. I had purchased this place 3 years ago after landing a major client that doubled my company's revenue. My family had attended the housewarming party, my mother commenting that the building was surprisingly nice, as if she had expected me to live somewhere substandard. I opened my laptop and pulled up the folder labeled Family Financials. Few people in my family knew the extent of my involvement in managing our shared assets. It had begun innocently enough 5 years ago, shortly after my grandmother's death. My father, overwhelmed by the complexity of the various trusts, properties, and investment accounts that made up the Sullivan fortune, had complained during a family dinner about the incompetence of their financial advisors. "It's all paperwork and passwords and account numbers," he had grumbled. "I built this business by developing properties, not pushing papers." "I could help organize it," I had offered. "My company handles complex digital systems for clients. I could create a management system for the family accounts." He had looked surprised, as if had forgotten I had any skills at all. "Well, I suppose you could look at it. Might as well make use of that detail-oriented personality of yours." What had started as a simple organizational task had evolved over time. I discovered outdated systems, inefficient structures, and several concerning irregularities in how the family finances were managed. Rather than simply creating a filing system, I had gradually implemented a complete overhaul. My father, uninterested in the particulars, as long as everything functioned smoothly, had given me increasing access and authority. I became the administrator on family credit accounts, the point of contact for investment advisors, and eventually the executor of significant portions of the family trust. What they didn't know, and what I had only fully realized myself in recent months, was that my grandmother had done more than just leave me the cabin. Her estate planning had been meticulous and strategic. As I had dug deeper into the trust documents, I discovered that Eleanor had structured things to give me considerable control over family assets, likely anticipating that I would be the only one responsible enough to manage them properly. I pulled up the most recent financial reports and began reviewing the true state of the Sullivan family finances. The picture they painted was very different from the one my family projected to the world. My own marketing agency had outperformed my brother's division of Sullivan Properties for 3 consecutive years. While he boasted about acquisitions and developments, the financial statements showed his projects consistently running over budget and under projected returns. The Henderson deal he had been praised for at Brunch had actually lost the company nearly $2 million, a fact concealed in creative accounting that I had quietly corrected in the master records. My personal investment portfolio, managed separately from the family accounts, had yielded returns that would have impressed even my father if he had bothered to look. I had started with my modest savings, made strategic investments in tech and sustainable energy companies, and built a personal net worth that rivaled my siblings combined without touching my inheritance. The cabin, now worth close to $2 million due to the booming lakefront property market, was fully paid off and entirely in my name. The property taxes, maintenance costs, and recent renovations had all been paid from my personal accounts, while my family continued to use it as their own without contribution or acknowledgement. But the most revealing information concerned the family's current financial status. Behind the facade of unlimited wealth and success, there were troubling signs. My brother's division was hemorrhaging money due to a series of poor decisions. He had invested heavily in a downtown development just before the pandemic shifted demand toward suburban properties. Rather than cutting losses, he had doubled down, taking on additional debt that now threatened the company's cash flow. My mother's spending had increased dramatically in the past year, with credit card statements showing 5-figure charges at luxury retailers, expensive spa retreats, and lavish preparations for Amanda's wedding. She had maxed out 3 different cards, all of which I administered. Most concerning was a document I had discovered only last week, a notice of a pending lawsuit against Sullivan Properties from former investors, alleging misrepresentation of financial projections. My father had kept this information from everyone, including James, but as the administrator of the legal billing accounts, I had seen the retainer paid to one of Chicago's top litigation firms. The Sullivan family was not on the brink of financial ruin, far from it. But the stable, ever-growing fortune they took for granted was far more precarious than they realized. And I, the daughter they pitied and dismissed, had more insight and control over their financial future than any of them knew. I closed the laptop slowly, a plan taking shape in my mind. For years I had used my skills to protect and grow the family wealth, while receiving nothing but criticism and condescension in return. I had maintained their cabin, corrected their financial mistakes, and supported the facade of success they presented to the world. And today my mother had made it abundantly clear that none of it mattered. I was included out of pity, not love or respect. I was tolerated, not valued. Well, tolerance went both ways. And perhaps it was time to stop tolerating the emotional abuse that had defined my family relationships for 34 years. I wasn't interested in revenge. That was too small a goal, too reactive. What I wanted was recognition of my worth, not just as a financial administrator, but as a human being deserving of basic respect. And if they couldn't give me that willingly, perhaps they needed to learn its value through its absence. I opened my laptop again and began methodically documenting everything I would need. This wasn't an emotional reaction, but a carefully considered recalibration of boundaries. If my family wanted to treat me as an outsider, they would lose the privileges of having me as an insider. The plan forming in my mind wasn't about hurting them, it was about finally prioritizing my own well-being over their convenience. And after a lifetime of putting their needs first, it was long overdue. I believe in methodical approaches to complex problems. In business, I always tell my team that emotional reactions lead to strategic mistakes. The same principle would apply here. This wasn't about lashing out in hurt or anger, this was about reclaiming my power and establishing clear boundaries after decades of allowing them to be trampled. My first call was to Sarah Goldstein, my personal attorney. Unlike the family lawyers who reported to my father, Sarah worked exclusively for me. I had hired her 2 years ago to handle contracts for my growing business, and she had proven herself to be both brilliant and discreet. "Sarah, I need your advice on some personal matters relating to family property," I said when she answered, despite it being Sunday afternoon. "Of course, Carol. What can I help with?" Her voice was crisp and professional, no questions about why I was calling outside business hours. "I need to review the legal status of the Michigan cabin that my grandmother left to me, specifically my options regarding its use and potential sale." I heard the sound of typing in the background. "Give me a moment to pull up those files." "Yes, I have the deed transfer documentation here. The property was transferred to you exclusively 5 years ago with no encumbrances or conditions. You have full legal rights to use, rent, or sell as you see fit. And the family trust. My role as executor for certain portions." She paused, and I could imagine her shifting through mental files recalling our previous discussions. "You have fiduciary responsibility for the portions you're managing, meaning you must act in the best interest of the beneficiaries. However, that doesn't extend to providing credit or financial services. You can resign as administrator of any accounts you're managing in that capacity." "Good. I need you to prepare formal documentation regarding the cabin. Specifically, a notice that I intend to sell the property and an accounting of all maintenance and tax expenses I've covered over the past 5 years that should have been shared expenses if it were truly a family property." There was another brief pause. "I understand. When would you like to serve these notices?" "Not yet. I'll let you know. But I want everything ready." After ending the call with Sarah, I turned back to my computer and began the process of reclaiming my financial independence from my family. One by one, I logged into the systems I had created and maintained. First, the family credit accounts. As administrator, I had set up the online portals, managed the security protocols, and monitored the statements. I did not remove myself entirely. It would be irresponsible to leave the accounts without oversight. Instead, I suspended additional user access privileges, effectively freezing the cards my mother, brother, and sister used for their discretionary spending. The primary accounts remained active, ensuring no essential bills would go unpaid. Next, I documented every unauthorized expense charged to my name over the past 5 years. Family members had developed a habit of using my business accounts for personal expenses, assuming I wouldn't notice or object. Dinner with clients that were actually dates, office supplies that were actually luxury goods, travel expenses for trips I never took. The total came to just over $74,000. I moved to the cabin expenses. Since inheriting the property, I had paid approximately $127,000 in property taxes, insurance, maintenance, and improvements. These costs should have been shared if the cabin were truly the communal family resource they treated it as. The spreadsheet I created was comprehensive, with every expense categorized, dated, and documented with receipts. This wasn't about the money itself. I could afford these expenses. It was about making visible what had been invisible, my financial contribution to a family that claimed to pity me. I researched current market values for lakefront properties in the area and found that similar cabins had recently sold for between $1.8 and $2.2 million. I composed an email to a real estate agent I knew in the area, inquiring about listing the property, making it clear this was still in the planning stages. Next, I contacted my financial advisor to schedule a meeting about formally separating my investments from the family portfolio. Over the years, certain accounts had become intermingled with my personal investments, helping to bolster family funds that were reported as solely Sullivan Properties assets. I compiled all essential documents, and transferred them to a secure cloud storage account that only I could access. The family had a shared drive for important papers, but I had learned long ago not to trust critical information to a system everyone could access. Too many things had a way of disappearing when they contradicted the family narrative. I made a call to a locksmith in Michigan, scheduling them to change the locks on the cabin the following week. I would mail them a key to access the property and ask them to leave the new keys in the secure lockbox I had installed last year. The last step was creating digital boundaries. I set up a new email filter that would automatically archive messages from family members into a folder I could check when I was emotionally prepared rather than having them interrupt my day. On my phone, I created a similar system sending family calls directly to voicemail and batching their text messages. Each action was deliberate, considered, and necessary. This wasn't a tantrum or an overreaction. This was the establishment of healthy boundaries that should have existed decades ago. By evening, I had completed the foundational work of my plan. I would not be cutting my family off entirely, that was neither necessary nor desirable. But I would be changing the terms of our relationship from one of exploitation to one of mutual respect. They had taken advantage of my financial expertise, my property, and my desire for approval for far too long. I fixed myself a simple dinner and sat on my balcony overlooking the lake. The sun was setting, casting orange and pink reflections across the water. For the first time in years, I felt no anxiety about upcoming family interactions, no dread about the next critical comment or dismissive response. I had taken control in the most effective way possible, not through confrontation, but through action. My phone buzzed with a text from my friend Melissa checking in about our plans for the following weekend. Unlike my family relationships, my friendships were built on mutual respect and genuine care. Melissa knew about my family dynamics and had been encouraging me to set stronger boundaries for years. I responded to her text with a simple message. I finally did it. I stood up for myself. Her reply came seconds later. About time. Details tomorrow over coffee. I smiled and confirmed our meeting. Then I turned off my phone, completely prepared a cup of chamomile tea, and settled in with a book I'd been meaning to read for months. Tomorrow would bring reactions and consequences, but tonight belonged to me and the peace I had finally claimed for myself. The first sign of the coming storm arrived precisely 48 hours after the brunch. My phone, which I had turned back on the following morning, displayed a missed call from James at 8:15 a.m. I was in a client meeting when he called, so I didn't see the notification until nearly noon. By then, there were 3 more missed calls from him, 2 from my mother and 1 from my father, all within a 4-hour period. No voicemails, interestingly, just repeated attempts to reach me directly. I finished my workday without responding, focusing instead on finalizing a campaign strategy for our newest client. It was nearly 6 in the evening when my phone lit up again, this time with James' name on the screen. After a moment's consideration, I declined the call and returned to reviewing the presentation my team had prepared. The first text message arrived seconds later. Carol, my card was declined at dinner with investors. Call me immediately. I set my phone aside and continued working. 10 minutes later, another message appeared. This is serious. Call me or I'm coming to your office. It was after 7 when I finally packed up for the day, nodding goodbye to the few team members still at their desks. My phone showed an additional 12 missed calls and 7 text messages now, including ones from my mother and sister. From my mother, Carol, what have you done? Call me right now. From Amanda, Mom is freaking out about credit cards. Did you do something? From James, this is completely unprofessional. Fix whatever you did to the accounts now. I drove home in peaceful silence, the evening traffic lighter than usual. In my condo, I changed into comfortable clothes, prepared a light dinner, and only then sat down to review the communications from my family, with the emotional distance of a business analyst rather than a perpetually wounded daughter. Over the next 45 minutes, I read increasingly frantic messages. My mother had apparently discovered her cards were declined while shopping for wedding items with Amanda. James had been unable to pay for a business dinner. My father, less dependent on the shared accounts, was demanding to know what technical glitch had occurred. None of them I noticed asked if I was okay or if something had happened to me. Their concern was exclusively for the inconvenience they were experiencing, not for my unexplained silence. At precisely 8:30, I sent a single group text, "I am well. I have made some necessary changes to the account access temporarily while I reorganize the financial systems. I will explain more once things are properly arranged." The response was immediate and overwhelming. My phone lit up with incoming calls that I did not answer. The text messages poured in, ranging from demands to threats to guilt trips. I read them all with clinical detachment, as if studying specimens under a microscope. By the third day, the pattern had escalated. My call log showed 47 missed calls. The family group chat had exploded with hundreds of messages oscillating between anger, concern, and increasingly desperate attempts to reach me. On the morning of the fourth day, I received an email from Walter Pierce, the family lawyer, requesting an urgent discussion regarding financial matters. I forwarded this to Sarah with a brief note, asking her to respond that I would be handling all communications through her office going forward. That afternoon, the front desk of my office building called up. "Your brother is here insisting on seeing you. He doesn't have an appointment. Should I send him up?" "No, thank you, Michael. Please inform him that I'm in meetings all day and unavailable." An hour later, my assistant knocked on my office door. "Carol, your brother is making a scene in the lobby. Security is asking if they should remove him or if you'd like to come down. Please tell security to escort him out. I won't be meeting with him today." I returned to my spreadsheets, aware of but unmoved by the drama unfolding 12 floors below. James had never experienced being told no in his entire life. It was probably educational for him. The following day brought a new development. The doorman at my condo building called to inform me that my mother was in the lobby insisting on coming up. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Sullivan, but Miss Sullivan has left specific instructions not to admit unannounced visitors, even family," he explained while I listened on the line. "This is ridiculous. I am her mother." My mother's voice carried clearly through the phone. "I appreciate that, ma'am, but I need to follow residents' instructions. Would you like to leave a message?" After my mother stormed out, I sent Thomas, my doorman, a generous gift card with a thank you note. Setting boundaries was easier with good allies. 6 days after the brunch, my family discovered the real estate listing for the cabin. I hadn't actually listed it yet, but the inquiries I'd sent to agents had apparently been noticed by Amanda's fiancé's mother, who had a summer home in the same area and monitored real estate movements closely. The family group chat exploded again. From Amanda, "Why is Grandma's cabin being valued for sale?" "Gregory's mom just called asking if we're having financial problems." From James, "You have no right to sell family property. Dad is furious." From my mother, "Call immediately. Your father is considering legal action." I didn't respond to any of these messages, but I did forward screenshots to Sarah, who assured me that my legal position was unassailable. The cabin was mine to sell if I chose to. On day 7, my father finally left a voicemail, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "Carol, we need to talk. Whatever this is about, we can discuss it like adults. Call me at the office tomorrow." I didn't call. On day 10, my financial advisor reported that James had attempted to access information about my personal investment accounts, claiming he was acting on behalf of the family to audit all Sullivan assets. He had been firmly but politely rebuffed. By the end of the second week, the initial fury had begun to shift toward negotiation. The messages became less demanding and more conciliatory. From my mother, "Carol, darling, if there's something we've done to upset you, we should discuss it. Family should always communicate." From James, "Look, if this is about what Mom said at brunch, she didn't mean it that way. You know how she island, let's talk." From Amanda, "I don't know what's happening, but please don't ruin my wedding year with family drama. Can we meet for coffee?" I maintained my silence, focusing instead on my work and self-care. I had dinner with Melissa, who listened to the entire story and then raised her wine glass in a toast. to Carol finally developing a spine of steel, she said with a grin. About time the Sullivan family learned who they're dealing with. My weekly therapy session with Dr. Winters was particularly productive. She noted the change in my demeanor immediately. "You seem different today, Carol, more grounded." "I feel different," I admitted. "For the first time, I'm not waiting for their approval or dreading their criticism. I'm just existing on my own terms." "That's significant progress," she said. "How are you handling the emotional fallout?" "With surprising ease, actually. I expected to feel guilty or anxious, but mostly I feel peaceful, as if I've finally put down a heavy weight I've been carrying since childhood." By the beginning of the third week, a new player entered the game. My father's business partner, Howard Jenkins, reached out via email. "Carol, I hope this message finds you well. Your father mentioned there are some family financial matters that need resolution. As someone who has always admired your business acumen, I wondered if I might offer my services as a neutral third party to facilitate discussion. No agenda beyond helping the Sullivan family find common ground." It was a clever approach, appealing to my professional side rather than emotional ties. I considered it carefully before responding. "Howard, I appreciate your offer and your diplomacy. This isn't a business dispute requiring negotiation, but a personal boundary requiring respect. That said, I am open to meeting with my family in a professional setting with appropriate representation present. If they're amenable to that, please have them contact my attorney to arrange details." 3 days later, Sarah called to inform me that the family lawyer had reached out to schedule a meeting. They had agreed to my terms, a meeting at Sarah's office with a professional mediator present and a clear understanding that this was a discussion, not a capitulation. The meeting was set for exactly 1 month after the fateful brunch. As the date approached, I felt none of the usual anxiety that preceded family encounters. Instead, I experienced something entirely new, the quiet confidence of someone who had found their power and was prepared to use it responsibly. The night before the meeting, I reviewed my documentation one final time, ensuring everything was organized and accessible. Then I selected my outfit with care, not the defensive armor of expensive clothes I usually wore to family gatherings, but a simple professional ensemble that reflected who I truly was. For the first time in my life, I was meeting my family as an equal. Not as the perpetually disappointing middle child, not as the convenient financial administrator, but as Carol Sullivan, successful business owner, property owner, and a woman who would no longer accept being valued less than she was worth. Sarah's office occupied the 27th floor of a sleek downtown building, with views of the Chicago River. The conference room she had selected featured a long mahogany table, comfortable leather chairs, and floor-to-ceiling windows that filled the space with natural light. It was professional neutral territory, exactly what this meeting required. I arrived 30 minutes early to review strategy with Sarah and meet Kathleen Barrow, the mediator who would be facilitating our discussion. Kathleen was a former family court judge with a reputation for fairness and an unwillingness to tolerate bullying tactics, a quality that would be essential when dealing with the Sullivan family dynamics. "I hope you understand that mediation has its limitations in a case like this," Judge Barrow said after introductions. "I'm here to facilitate communication, not to make rulings or force agreements." "I understand completely," I replied. "My goal isn't to win a legal battle, it's to establish clear boundaries for moving forward." At exactly 2 o'clock, the receptionist announced the arrival of my family. Sarah squeezed my arm supportively as we stood to greet them. They entered as a unit, a unified front, just as they had always presented themselves. My father led the way, his expression carefully neutral, but his posture rigid with contained anger. My mother followed, her face a mask of injured dignity. James looked openly hostile, while Amanda seemed uncertain, hanging back slightly, as if reluctant to be associated with whatever was about to unfold. The family lawyer, Walter Pierce, entered last. He had represented Sullivan interests for over 20 years and looked distinctly uncomfortable to be facing me across a negotiation table rather than having me docilely beside the family. "Thank you all for coming," Kathleen began once everyone was seated. "Before we start, I'd like to establish some ground rules for our discussion today." She outlined basic expectations: one person speaking at a time, no interruptions, no personal attacks, and a focus on moving forward rather than assigning blame. My family shifted impatiently through this introduction, clearly eager to move to what they saw as the real purpose of the meeting, bringing me back in line. Now, I'd like to begin by asking Carol to explain her concerns and what she hopes to achieve today, Kathleen said, turning to me with a professional nod. I opened the folder before me and took a slow, centering breath. When I spoke, my voice was calm and clear. 3 weeks ago, at what should have been a normal family brunch, my mother stated explicitly what has been implicitly communicated to me throughout my life, that I am included in this family out of pity, not love or respect. My mother immediately attempted to interrupt, but Kathleen held up a hand, reminding her of the ground rules. That comment was the culmination of a lifetime of similar messages, I continued, and it prompted me to reevaluate my role in this family, particularly regarding the unacknowledged financial and administrative support I have provided for years. I detailed my gradual assumption of financial responsibilities, the systems I had created and maintained, and the cabin I legally owned but had allowed the family to use without recognition or contribution. These arrangements developed because I genuinely wanted to support my family, I explained, but they have resulted in a deeply unbalanced relationship where my contributions are taken for granted while I am personally devalued. My father frowned, glancing at Walter as if seeking confirmation of my claims. James leaned forward, his expression darkening. "So this is extortion," he said flatly. "You're holding family assets hostage because your feelings were hurt." Kathleen intervened before I could respond. "That's not a productive characterization, Mr. Sullivan. Carol is explaining her perspective, not making demands." "I appreciate your concern, James," I said calmly, "but nothing I've done constitutes extortion. I've simply reclaimed control over assets that legally belong to me and suspended access privileges that were granted as courtesies, not rights." My mother could contain herself no longer. "How could you do this to your family?" she demanded, her voice trembling with what an observer might mistake for emotion rather than thwarted entitlement. "After everything we've done for you?" "And what exactly is that, Mother?" I asked, genuinely curious about what she believed they had provided me. She blinked momentarily, thrown by the question. We gave you every opportunity. The best schools, connections, inclusion in family events." I nodded thoughtfully. "Yes, I received an education that all 3 of us children received as a baseline expectation. As for connections, I've built my business network independently. And regarding inclusion in family events that was explicitly described as pity 3 weeks ago." My father cleared his throat, clearly attempting to steer the conversation in a different direction. "Carol, whatever grievances you may have, this approach is damaging the family reputation. Gregory's mother is already asking questions about the cabin listing. James' clients are concerned about the company's stability after his card was declined. I'm sorry to hear that," I said sincerely, "but I'm not responsible for the stories you've told about family assets or the expectations you've set based on access that was always contingent on mutual respect." Now James leaned forward, his professional facade cracking to reveal the entitled boy beneath. "I'll destroy your reputation in this city," he threatened, voice low. "One word from me about how you've gone rogue with family finances, and your little marketing business will collapse." Sarah straightened beside me, but I placed a hand on her arm. This was exactly the dynamic I had anticipated. "That would be an interesting approach," I replied calmly, "particularly since I have documented every transaction, correction, and financial rescue I've performed over the past 5 years." I opened my laptop and turned it toward the center of the table, displaying the first of many spreadsheets I'd prepared. This shows the Henderson deal that was celebrated at brunch. The official narrative is that James saved the negotiation. The financial reality is that the deal lost nearly $2 million, which I covered by reallocating funds from more successful investments to conceal the deficit. I clicked to the next document. This is a summary of personal expenses charged to business accounts over the past 3 years. Over $74,000 of charges, that had nothing to do with Sullivan Properties operations. With each new document I shared, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Walter Pierce began taking rapid notes, occasionally exchanging concerned glances with my father. James slouched back in his chair, his earlier bravado fading. Amanda looked increasingly uncomfortable while my mother sat rigid with disbelief. "I want to be very clear," I said after completing my presentation. "I'm not sharing this information as a threat or to cause embarrassment. I'm sharing it to illustrate why the current dynamic cannot continue. I've been treated as an afterthought in this family, while simultaneously serving as its financial safety net." The room fell silent. For perhaps the first time in Sullivan family history, no one had an immediate rebuttal or dismissal ready. My father was the first to speak, his voice uncharacteristically subdued. "We've taken advantage of you." 5 simple words. Not quite an apology, but an acknowledgement that had never before been offered. James immediately objected. "Dad, you can't be serious. She's just trying to manipulate us with creative accounting. These numbers could be anything." Walter Pierce cleared his throat. "Actually, James, having reviewed the documentation Carol has provided, I can confirm these figures align with the records in my office. The difference is the context and attribution she's provided, which—" He paused, choosing his words carefully, "presents a concerning pattern when viewed collectively." My mother had recovered enough to attempt a different approach, turning tearful eyes toward me. "Carol, darling, if you felt underappreciated, you should have said something. There's no need for all this drama." I almost laughed at the irony of her characterizing my spreadsheets and documentation as drama while she performed emotional distress. "I have said something, Mother. Many times, in many ways, over many years. The difference is that now, I'm not just saying it, I'm acting on it." "So, what do you want?" Amanda finally spoke, her voice small. "Money control of the company. What will make this go away?" "This isn't something to make go away," I explained gently. "This is a fundamental reset of our family dynamic. What I want is simple respect. Not as a financial administrator or a convenient solution to problems, but as a full and equal member of this family." I turned to address each of them directly. "Father, that means acknowledging my professional success on its own terms, not as an extension of the Sullivan name. Mother, it means ending the constant criticism and comparisons. James, it means treating me as a colleague, not a resource to be exploited. Amanda, it means seeing me as a sister, not competition or an afterthought." But practically speaking, my father pressed, "What are your terms?" "The cabin remains my property to use or sell as I determine appropriate. Family members may request to use it with reasonable notice and contribution to maintenance costs. The financial systems I've created remain under my management, but with transparent reporting to all involved parties. And most importantly, the pattern of dismissal and disrespect ends now. I will no longer tolerate being treated as less valuable than other members of this family." My father nodded slowly, considering. "And the credit accounts, the trust administration—" "I'll restore access to essential accounts immediately. The others will be restructured to include proper oversight and accountability. As for the trust, I'm happy to continue as administrator, but with formal recognition and compensation for that role." James began to object again, but my father silenced him with a raised hand. His eyes remained on me, studying my face, as if seeing me clearly for the first time. "You've changed, Carol," he said finally. "Not just in the past few weeks, but I think I've missed watching you become the woman you are now." It wasn't quite the recognition I had hoped for, but it was perhaps the most honest thing my father had ever said to me. The next 2 hours were devoted to working through practical details. Walter and Sarah negotiated specific terms, while Kathleen kept the conversation productive. My mother oscillated between tearful appeals to family loyalty and sharp accusations of betrayal. James maintained that I was overreacting to a simple comment, while Amanda mostly observed in confused silence. By the end of the meeting, we had a framework for moving forward. Not a complete resolution, both Walter and Sarah agreed, that would require additional sessions, but a starting point that acknowledged the reality of our situation rather than the fiction the Sullivan family had maintained for decades. As we prepared to leave, my father hung back, letting the others exit first. When we were alone except for Sarah, who maintained a respectful distance, he turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Your grandmother would be proud," he said quietly. "She always said you were the one who truly understood the meaning of wealth." I blinked, surprised by both the reference to my grandmother and the sentiment itself. "She never told me that," I replied. My father nodded, a fleeting smile crossing his face. "No, she told me," repeatedly. "I should have listened to her sooner." He extended his hand formally as he would to a business associate he respected. "We have a lot of work to do, Carol. I hope you'll give us the chance to do it right this time." I looked at his offered hand, the same hand that had signed my school reports, with distracted disinterest that had waved away my accomplishments as expected rather than exceptional. After a moment's consideration, I took it. This wasn't forgiveness, not yet. That would take time and consistent change. But it was acknowledgement, acceptance, that the old patterns had failed us all, and that something new might be possible if we were brave enough to build it. As I watched my father walk away, I felt neither triumph nor vindication, but something quieter and more profound, the steady certainty of standing on solid ground after a lifetime of shifting sand. 6 months after the confrontation in Sarah's office, I stood on the deck of my cabin watching the sunrise over the lake. The early October air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and the distant promise of winter. Mist rose from the water's surface, catching the golden light and transforming the familiar landscape into something magical and new. I had spent the past week here alone, working remotely, and overseeing the final touches on the renovations I'd started in late summer. The old wooden deck had been completely rebuilt, extending further toward the water and incorporating a new fire pit area. Inside, I'd updated the kitchen with modern appliances, while carefully preserving the rustic charm my grandmother had loved. The decision not to sell had come gradually. As the family dynamics shifted and healed, I realized the cabin represented more than just a financial asset or a symbol of control. It was a connection to my grandmother, a place of genuine peace, and potentially a setting for new family memories that wouldn't be tainted by the old patterns. The past 6 months had brought changes I couldn't have imagined that day at brunch, when my mother's casual cruelty had finally broken through my lifetime of accommodation. My father had made the most surprising transformation. 2 weeks after our meeting, he had called, not to discuss finances or family business, but to invite me to coffee. "Just you and me, Carol. I'd like to hear about your current projects if you're willing to share." That first coffee had been awkward, filled with careful conversation and the weight of decades of emotional distance. But it had been followed by another the next week, and then another. Gradually, our meetings had evolved into a genuine opportunity for connection. My father asked questions about my business approach, occasionally offered advice when asked, and most surprisingly shared stories about his own early career struggles I'd never heard before. During our 5th coffee meeting, he had looked at me with an expression I didn't recognize at first. I finally realized it was pride. "The Henderson client you helped salvage last quarter reached out to me personally to praise the new marketing strategy. Said it was the most innovative approach they'd seen in years. That was your work, wasn't it?" I had nodded, surprised both by his awareness and his acknowledgement. "Exceptional work, Carol. Truly exceptional." 3 simple words that I had waited 34 years to hear. My mother's adjustment had been more difficult. Decades of defining herself through social competition and her children's conformity to her expectations couldn't be undone in months. Our interactions remained somewhat strained, though the outright criticism had largely been replaced by an uncertain politeness. The real breakthrough had come unexpectedly during preparations for Amanda's wedding. The event planner had quit abruptly, citing irreconcilable creative differences with my mother, a diplomatic way of saying my mother had made impossible demands and been unwilling to compromise. In desperation, Amanda had called me. "I know it's a lot to ask after everything, but you're the most organized person I know and you have all those vendor contacts through your business. Could you possibly help?" I had agreed with clear boundaries about my role and authority. To everyone's surprise, including my own, my mother and I made an effective team when our skills were appropriately aligned. Her social connections and eye for aesthetic detail complemented my project management abilities and vendor relationships. 2 weeks before the wedding, as we finalized the seating arrangements in my mother's sunroom, she had looked up from the chart with an odd expression. "You know, if you had been a wedding planner instead of a marketing executive, we might have gotten along better all these years." I raised an eyebrow, unsure if this was criticism disguised as observation. She sighed, setting down her pen. "That came out wrong. What I meant was, you're very good at this. At organizing, at making things happen, at seeing the big picture while not missing details. I should have valued those qualities instead of how I behaved." It wasn't quite an apology, but from my mother it was revolutionary. James had maintained his distance, our relationship now primarily professional, through the restructured family business arrangements. His initial anger had gradually given way to grudging respect, as he was forced to acknowledge my financial acumen. We weren't close and might never be, but we had established a functional relationship based on clearly defined roles and expectations. The most surprising development had been with Amanda. After the wedding, which went flawlessly despite my mother's fears, my sister had invited me to lunch. Over salads at a quiet cafe, she had confessed something I never expected. "I was always jealous of you," she said, studying her water glass intently. "You were so complete somehow. You knew who you were, what you wanted. I just knew how to be what everyone else wanted." "But you were the favorite," I pointed out, confused by her perspective. "You had everything." She shook her head. "I had approval, which isn't the same thing at all, and it was always conditional on being exactly what they expected." She looked up at me, her expression vulnerable in a way I'd never seen. "Do you know how exhausting that is?" That lunch had led to others, and gradually a genuine sisterhood began to develop between us, something that had never existed during our childhood. Amanda was exploring her own identity now, taking art classes, and considering a career in gallery management rather than the social charity circuit our mother had envisioned for her. My business had thrived through all these family adjustments. The clarity and confidence I'd gained from establishing boundaries had translated into more assertive business strategies and a willingness to pursue larger clients. My agency had grown to 22 employees with a new office space overlooking the Chicago River. Perhaps the most unexpected development in my personal life was Daniel, the architectural historian I'd met during the cabin renovations. He had been recommended by a colleague to consult on preserving the original character of the building while updating its functionality. Our professional discussions had gradually evolved into dinners, then weekends, and now a relationship that felt unlike any I'd experienced before, genuine, supportive, and based on mutual respect rather than need or convenience. Daniel understood family complexity, having navigated his own challenging relationships with parents who had never accepted his career choice or sexual orientation. He listened without trying to fix, supported without taking over, and most importantly, saw me clearly and valued what he saw. Throughout this period of transformation, I had continued my weekly sessions with Dr. Winters. Her guidance had been essential in helping me process the changes in my family dynamics without falling back into old patterns. Setting boundaries was just the first step, she had reminded me during a particularly difficult week after a tense family dinner. Maintaining them while remaining open to genuine change is the real work. And it was work, challenging, ongoing, imperfect work. There were still difficult moments, old habits that resurfaced, and occasional retreats to familiar patterns. But underneath it all was a fundamental shift in how I viewed myself in relation to my family. I was no longer seeking approval or acceptance. I was offering connection on terms that honored my worth rather than diminished it. As I stood on the newly rebuilt deck, watching the sun clear the horizon, I heard the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway. Daniel had arrived, followed shortly by Melissa and her husband. Later today, my father would join us, his first visit to the cabin since our confrontation. Amanda and her husband had promised to drive up tomorrow. My mother had declined the invitation with a transparent excuse about a charity commitment, and James hadn't responded at all. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't the happy family reunion that childhood me might have fantasized about, but it was real. And after a lifetime of pretending of accepting less than I deserved, real was more than enough. I turned from the lake to welcome my guests, my chosen family arriving to blend with the biological ones still learning how to truly see me. The path forward wasn't entirely clear, but for the first time I was walking it as my authentic self, not the convenient administrator, not the disappointing middle child, but Carol Sullivan, complete, worthy, and finally at home in her own life. The journey from that brunch where my mother's casual cruelty had crystallized a lifetime of dismissal to this moment of genuine peace hadn't been about revenge or even justice. It had been about recognition, the simple, profound truth that we teach others how to treat us by what we accept, what we allow, and what we refuse to tolerate any longer. Perhaps the most important lesson I'd learned was that pity wasn't the basis for meaningful inclusion in any relationship worth having. Real connection required mutual respect, genuine interest, and the willingness to see people as they are, not as we wish them to be. As I welcomed Daniel with a kiss and Melissa with a hug, I felt gratitude for the painful catalyst that had finally pushed me to claim my worth. Sometimes the greatest gift is the moment when we can no longer tolerate what we've accepted for far too long. What about you? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family or loved ones? Did it lead to positive change or difficult realizations? Share your experience in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more stories about finding strength in challenging relationships. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember, you deserve to be valued for exactly who you are, not what others want you to be.